fantastic. And can we invite all of you folks not sitting in front of a microphone to come sit at the table, so when we get to the interactive session, we can make sure if you want to ask a question or make a comment, we get you as well. And we are going to start in just 1 minute when one of our panelists comes in. And thank you so much for that.
Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to this NRIs session on fake news. It's a great topic and it's great to see so many people here. We have a wonderful panel ready for you. I should introduce myself first. My name is Nick Wenban-Smith. I'm the Secretariat for the UK IGF, and I'll be one of the moderators for today's session. So I will try to speak clearly, slowly, and to give everybody on the panel a good opportunity to express their perspectives on the fake news phenomenon from all around the globe. And we're really privileged to actually have a really good diversity of national and regional internet governance forums to shed some interesting perspectives and light on this. So without too much further ado, I will ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves, and then we will have a session where we'll hear back the perspectives from around the world. We'll then have an opportunity to discuss themes of commonality and differences, and then we'll have a wider Q&A session where we want that to be properly interactive and to get some really good questions in from the room before finally trying to see, maybe this is optimistic, but we will try to find some solutions and where next to get somewhere on this thorny topic.
And Nick, perhaps I might just make an introductory statement first. Before we go to introductions, my name is Marilyn Cade. I'm going to be co-moderating, but I just wanted to make an introductory statement about what this session is and what it isn't. Nick mentioned that we are a NRI to NRI collaborative session. The national and regional IGF initiatives are organic, bottom-up, consensus-based activities that are driven out of the community that organizes them. They have no official relationship to the global IGF. They have a voluntary relationship with it. There are over 101. And there were only 57 2 years ago, and we are doing 8 sessions where NRIs are collaborating with each other. There will be several other fake news workshops later in the week, and you'll see probably many of these folks participating there. But for this session, it's the national and regional IGFs collaborating with each other in talking about this. And I just wanted to mention that so that you are then later, when you go to a workshop, you're going to hear very different people speaking and very different perspectives, but you may see some of us here as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Marilyn, for that point of housekeeping and good order. So sometimes we all need to have a bit of order kept on us, and that's what we have Marilyn to rely on that for. So just starting next to Marilyn, if you could start to introduce yourselves, please, and just state your name, your affiliation for the time being to begin with. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Abdul Hakim Ajijola. I'm actually from Nigeria. My background is that I had once in a different lifetime worked for the Nigerian National Security Advisor to the President. I also do quite a bit of work with the Nigerian Internet Governance Forum. And I also, and why this topic is of particular interest to me, is I do a lot of work with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation on basically countering extremism and violence online. So that both in terms of that and also in terms of what we do in Nigeria, I take a lot of interest at looking at the weaponization of fake news and hate speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigeria.
Hello to everyone.
That's it.
Okay. I come from Croatian IGF. My name is Hrvoje Lisičar. I'm a professor at Law Faculty, University of Zagreb, and for last 15 years as a scientist I am dealing with the topics of regulation of the internet, being fake news, being cybercrime, and all of the topics that are related to the regulation of the internet.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Joan Lopez. I'm from Colombia. I work with Charisma Foundation, that it's an NGO interested on defending the civil rights on internet and digital environments.
Hi, I'm Shane Tews. I'm with IGF USA, and I'm a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., where I focus on the digital economy and I run the Global Internet Strategy Program.
Hi everyone, I'm Wilma Westenberg. I'm from the Netherlands, and this year I helped organizing the local Dutch IGF, and as a youth we organized a session about fake news.
Good morning, everyone. Or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Uduma. I'm from Nigeria, and I'll be monitoring the online participants with my colleague.
Good morning. My name is Julian Casasbuenas from Colombian IGF, and I will be supporting also the remote participation.
Great. Thank you very much for those introductions. So, first of all, can we just hear very briefly, 3 minutes, more or less, feeding back on what happened in the fake news topic area for your IGF? And I think we'll start in the same order, just going down the run from the right, please. So, Abdul?
Thank you. Basically, when we held our own discussions in Nigeria, we did tend to focus a little more on what to do as opposed to what is the problem. But we did discuss what I'd call the whys. And I'd just like to run through a couple of the whys in our case. First of all, we believe that fake news, hate speech, and the like actually undermine our democracy. We've seen it in other countries, and we know that in our particular situation, this is exacerbated by the ethnic chauvinists that we have in our country. And so what we find is that there are the hate speech in particular, but which is underpinned by fake news, actually exacerbates the various social and political divides. Interestingly, in a country like ours that we believe ourselves to be quite religious, we found it very ironic that basically all major religions view peddling of fake news as a sin. One would call it slander, but for some reason people still do it because it's online. One of the other areas that we were particularly concerned about was the loss of trust in institutions. As a developing country, we are very concerned about confidence in our institutions, not just by our citizenry, but also by foreign investors. So many times when some of these patently false pieces of information come out, it causes a lot of problems. And then a very unique kind of fake news that we find in our part of the world, for example, is somebody will spread a rumor that a particular food product has pork. And especially for example, the Muslim community, that's a big no-no. And so we found that there was a lot of that. But having said that, I think we have elections coming up in 2019. And one of the great concerns we have is there any need for a country that doesn't like us to really hack our military? Why don't they just hack the commander-in-chief by hacking the voter? so that you choose a commander-in-chief. And I think there's a Sun Tzu thing about that. But I'd like to dwell on solutions when it comes around to me again.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And that's from Nigeria, obviously, perhaps the originator of the internet scams and famous. I think we've all had emails from the Nigerian Prince of. Thank you. We'll move on to Croatia, please.
Okay. The main topic of Croatian IGF was called media literacy and fake news, because we thought that the best way to tackle the fake news is through programs of media literacy. During the session, we discussed the problems that we have in Croatia, one of them being lack of trust in traditional media, especially in public service broadcasters, because there is a lack of professional standards in the journalism, and because of that, people have a huge distrust towards the traditional media, especially young people, and they inform themselves mainly through Facebook, because we have more than half of our population is on Facebook, and that is also the problem for the traditional media, because they have to chase clicks, and they do not uphold their standards. Also, one of the main conclusions of our session was that we have to introduce media literacy programs in our schools, because in Croatia we don't have any. And we should also focus through this media literacy program on something that's called news literacy, to inform young people how to distinguish fake news from the real news, and how to distinguish fake media from real media. Thank you.
Thank you, Croatia. Colombia, please.
Hi. In the IGF in Colombia, we, as civil society organization, were on charge of organizing this topic of fake news. So we try to create to bring speakers from different stakeholders and also create an equivalence in gender terms. We invite some NGOs that suffer of fake news, senators, NGOs, and press. And they try to show different solutions or projects of analyzing fake news. So one of the most interesting was made by the press. The press create a system to try to receive WhatsApp fake news and try to fact-checking this WhatsApp fake news. It's really interesting because in Colombia, the WhatsApp is really, really important to spread out all these fake news. And it's really, 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 really impressive because it's a really obscure WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a really obscure system, and it's really difficult to bring this logic in the click economy. So yeah, it was really, really interesting. And the other one was the government is working on is fighting against child pornography, cyberbullying, extortion, with different campaigns of awareness. And they are trying to use a new campaign called Let's Lower the Tone to try to solve the discussions, the political discussions in our country, because we are in a peace process. So it's a really difficult issue to speak about politics in our country. So yeah, I think it's the basic discussions.
Thank you very much, Colombia. USA.
Hi. So we had our meeting in July, so we were really just kind of coming around to what had just happened in our election cycle, and we were lucky because we were able to have the moderator of our panel be Dana Priest from the Washington Post. And we had both Vint Cerf, who's pretty well known in this area, but he's current evangelist at Google, and Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist and the Craig Newmark Foundation, come in and talk about how they saw this, what they had envisioned when they were really starting their thoughts about the internet. Vint had some very interesting things to say. He was saying, you know, in the very beginning, he knew that openness was crucial because it was what allowed permissionless innovation, but he hadn't thought much about dealing with bad faith and what would happen in political speech. So he was still kind of processing this himself. He also had a concern about, he hadn't thought about what to do about if anyone was going to develop and create an unprecedented social control mechanism. The one thing he said, he'd recently talked to Henry Kissinger and told him that Henry was concerned that the internet was training people to be satisfied with too little information. Craig Newmark's key point was that he was very interested in getting proactive on bringing fact checkers online. So we had a really interesting dialogue, and I'll be fascinated because I know that Nigeria is going to go back to solutions. We spent more time talking about, we were navel gazing, I think, at that point, on where we were, but we'll talk about solutions as well.
Thank you, USA. Obviously, USA is another country with a claim to be the originator of the topic in the first place, so thank you. Netherlands, please.
Yeah, so we organized the Dutch IGF in October, and we had 2 sessions. One was with students, and the other one was not only students, but still students participated too. We had about 100 people. They were from industry, politicians, social organizations, scientists. So it was a really mixed group. We organized sessions about different topics, of which one was fake news. First, we had a few speakers who were introducing the topic and starting the discussion. And then we went apart in smaller groups, and we really started to dive into what could be solutions, how are we already dealing with this issue. A few solutions that were called were blockchain and maybe issue penalties. We will talk about this later in this session. I think that's a short wrap-up of about our Dutch IGF.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Netherlands. I nearly said Holland. So that's quite a nice introductory sort of feedback of what happened at each of the NRI organisation meetings. So just drawing together some of the themes of commonality there. I mean, we've heard quite a lot about social media, and particularly because this is now a sort of an unregulated new borderless form where, you know, the traditional controls on editorial quality, content and fact-checking don't apply. So that's obviously a big area. Certainly from the UK perspective, we had Facebook at our IGF, and actually they were pretty frank about the countermeasures that you can realistically put into place. We also heard a bit about elections, and dare I say it, with the sort of moderator's neutrality, we could extend that to referenda and referendums, and the impact that can be had. And so those are 2 areas which we've talked about. I think it seemed to come across from several different parts of the world. But I'm quite interested, because no one has yet mentioned it, about what actually is the definition of fake news. Is it deliberate misinformation versus just carelessness versus parody? And I don't know whether that was actually a topic of any of your meetings as well. So I'd be interested if, on those 3 areas around social media, the definition of fake news, and impact on electoral democracy, whether you could expand a bit on those topics and to say whether we can draw any themes together across those areas. And I think just it would be logical to start in the same area again, or I could start in reverse order to confuse. No, let's start in the same order again. Okay, thank you. Oh, were you? Okay. No, it's same.
Well, we basically just looked at the dictionary definitions in terms of our thinking about fake news, basically false or hoax news purporting to be real news. Again, given our own environment, we really were very concerned about the issue of hate speech, which was, attack on a person or group based on their race. In our case, it would be based on tribe. And there's been quite a lot of that going on in our country. We have certain irredentist movements. There are, I guess, like most countries, there are calls for devolution. There were two areas, however, of great concern and a lot of debate that we really are not able right now to resolve, and maybe it's something that can be addressed by some of the people in the audience. The first one was the issue of the impact of artificial intelligence. We actually, in our main meeting, watched a small video that demonstrated how artificial intelligence can take a 1 or 2 minute speech, for example, of a politician, and basically, in this case, it was the former president of the US, and basically, echo something totally different. And of course, in a country like ours, with a relatively low literacy rate, when somebody says, but I saw him, I heard him say so, that can cause a lot of problems for us. The second big issue that we really didn't resolve, and it's something I throw open to the audience as well, is the issue of censorship. Do we really want, with all due respect, an American large global social media company censoring speech in Nigeria? What's our national sovereignty? But at the same time, do we really want the Nigerian government censoring our speech? So like I said, these are the kind of things that we've been very concerned about. And, I guess I would throw those open to the audience to also think about or ponder on as we continue our discussion. Thank you.
I think those sounded like rhetorical questions to me. We'll have a session for Q&A, I promise you, shortly. Thank you. It's, maybe USA will respond when we get round to them in terms of the domination by the USA of pretty much the whole of the rest of the world, and really what they're going to do about it to keep their house in order. But let's move on.
First, I have to say that, coming as a law professor, I have to say that we have to make sure to distinguish the illegal content from the fake news. Because illegal content, like defamation or something similar, or hate speech, is something that is already regulated in most of the countries. So we have to distinguish that from something that's called fake news, although this term fake news, journalists especially don't like it because it gives a negative connotation to all of the news. And politicians also use them to debunk certain information that they don't like. So journalists try to use something like false news or some different terms. In a definition, the closest to fake news would be some particular fraudulent form of disinformation, because it has an intent to deceive the reader. It's actually it emulates the format, language, and titles of prominent news outlets, sometimes even faking the web pages of prominent news outlets. But then it is also the question of legality because of the intellectual property. So it can also be treated as an illegal content. It also exists, in my opinion, and with the fake news, we have rumors, false claims, false advertising is also something that is very important, and conclusions that are not based on evidence. All those categories can be treated as something like fake news, false news, or whatever we call it. But one point that I would like to make here is from where does main initiatives comes when we are talking about fighting against fake news? Certain governments and politicians, media outlets and journalists, and online platforms. But when we look at the history, governments often use various forms of propaganda that are fake news, and they lost their monopoly on that. Journalists are trying to compete with social media platforms right now, and they are not upholding professional standards because they are chasing clicks for the revenue. So they also have lots of interest in fighting fake news. And when we are talking about big online platforms, up till now, there was always talk about free media, free market of information, deregulation, that market would be regulating itself. And now we have actually, in some ways, especially in information market, unregulated monopolies. You have 5 companies that are actually monopolies in that sense. And the problem for them is that fake news uses the same concept and same business model as the companies are using for the online marketing and creating their revenue. So these are actually the sources of the problems. And then there is a question at the end, who is to blame? Who are we fighting with? So maybe we will answer those questions later in our discussion. Thank you.
That's really interesting. And I just wondered whether you drew any distinction between, you talk about chasing clicks, and I wonder whether you drew any distinction between chasing clicks for purely financial gain, which could, of course, be misleading, and it could be certainly a civil offence, if not a criminal offence, but versus the deliberate misinformation in order to change an election outcome, or to do something actually much more maliciously incentivized, rather than just for sort of a pure sort of click chasing.
There is different motivation for everyone. You can have a motivation for propaganda, you can have for monetization, and you can have motivation in trolling. So those are different motivations for disseminating fake news. And when you talk about journalists and chasing clicks, they also have different motivations. They can do it because they like certain party, political party, or something else, but they can also do it, and they often do it to gain more readers and to get more revenue from the marketing.
Thank you. I'll go back to Colombia.
So, first of all, I should say that I'm a historian, so yeah, I tend to think all the problems in historical terms, and when we talk about fake news, I think it's emerged as a new concept just 2 years ago, but I don't feel that like that, because I think that there is misinformation have been existed the whole history, and I think it tends to be related to that is a problem that had been emerging in some countries in the north. In the global south, we always have been clientelism, fake news spreading through different media, and that follows to the elections. We had a referendum for the peace agreement, and it's really interesting to analyze how the fake news for the peace, about the peace agreement, were spreading through the radio in really far away areas and rural areas that just have a radio owned by the state and by the government. So it's really interesting to try to analyze in that term the problem of the fake news. And if we think about social media, it's really interesting also the idea that the spreading of the fake news through social media is made by the politicians. The politicians are trying to fight to define the memory of the conflict. So they are spreading fake news about, I don't know, try to say that this politician is part of the guerrillas, or this politician is a far-right movement. So it's really interesting to see how the politicians are spreading fake news to define the memory of the conflict that is quite important in a country that is going through a peace process. So, yeah, I think it's the thing that I was interesting to say.
I think it's well expressed that history is written by the victors, right? So, anyway, so the government's also losing their monopoly on media and fake news outlets is an interesting viewpoint.
So again, IGF USA was in July, and the plenary session was titled Nationalism, Disinformation, and the Free Expression of the Age of the Internet. And at this point, we were still really focusing on a lot of the technical aspect of what had happened and if there was a way to manage it. One of the things that Craig Newmark mentioned is he thought that there should be a taxonomy created in news that would help you decide what was fake and not fake. He thought there could be tags for satire, parody, opinion pieces, and factual pieces, but he noted that The Onion would be much less funny if you thought you didn't believe at first it was real news. And then we did have Ambassador Karen Kornblum from the OECD who talked about micro-targeting and the challenges it makes. It makes it much easier to disseminate disinformation because you don't understand how it's getting to really, very specific targets. We also had Amy Sapanovich on, who is with, she's Access Now, but I don't think that's right. Yeah, she's with Access Now. And she really wanted to focus on the, consuming media mindfully. So we were just starting to do the shift to, okay, what do we want to do about this? I think because of the nature of who we had on the panel, we were still very much focused on the technical elements. Since then, we have had congressional hearings, and one of the key things that has come up, which my colleagues on the panel have mentioned, is looking at this from the idea is, are these companies that were spreading a lot of this information actually media companies, and what is their level of responsibility in that? So that was something that we were just starting to manage into in July.
So jokes in future will come with a forewarning that you're about to be told a joke. You heard it here.
I don't have that much to add, but I want to tell you that at the Dutch IGF we mainly focused on journalists and spreading fake news. And we also, most of the time, we focused on the children and how we could solve it with education. So not only the technical part, but also how we can involve education to prevent fake news and spreading and increase the awareness. I think we will talk about solutions later.
Yeah. So at the end of the session, I do want to save a bit of time to have a bit of an exploration on the solutions and really what we can take away from this session collectively in terms of ideas and what could be solutions for the communities. I think that's a really nice opportunity now to widen it out into any audience participation. And I don't know whether, Marilyn, you could help me with the sort of ordering of questions and who's in what order. When you ask a question, could you please clearly state your name for the record and speak? We don't want any platforming. I just want some sort of quick questions and really to try to explore it and tease it out. Thank you.
So I'm going to run this in a very organized fashion, and here's what I want you to do. Waving at me doesn't help. I want everybody who wants to make a comment or ask a question to raise their hand, and then I'm going to go one from this column, one from this column, one from this column, and then come back again, okay? Sound fair? Okay, everybody who wants to speak.
And one from online as well, yes.
And actually, we're going to go always first to online. Is that okay? Yes. Okay. So, first of all, I want to get a count real quickly. How many of you want to make a comment or ask a question? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to see if we have any remote questions, and then we're going to start in reverse order. 1, 1, 1. Okay? Do we have a remote?
Yes, we have a question from Martin Schmalschritt, hope I pronounce well his last name, from Families Europe, and Europe NGO. And he said, I have 2 questions for the panel. First one is whether they think that fake news and the fact that many people fall prey to it is completely disconnected with the context, namely the growing inequalities. As political scientist Hannah Arendt saw from the 1930s Germany, that the rise to power in the Nazi Party is that there were fact checkers that deconstructed the Nazi propaganda for fake news. But given the dire economic social context, it had little impact. Second question is whether the participants don't believe it is better to expose people to a wider diversity of news sources via algorithms instead of trying to fact-check everything. Fact-checking carries a heavy risk. For instance, the claim that the Iraq held weapons of mass destruction was fake news by any reasonable standard.
Okay, so if I heard that right, that's a question in two parts. Firstly, around, well, even with fact-checking, does it even matter? Because people will decide what they want to decide. And secondly, is an interesting one around sort of technical solutions and AI and the role in trying to, because I think part of the problem with fake news is just the sheer scale. So if you could automate it or to build in some sort of technical solutions, then maybe that's an interesting line of discussion. Perhaps we'll go from the other end of the table first this time. So we'll start off with the Netherlands. The way I heard the questions were quite long, so it makes it quite difficult for the panelists, particularly at the end of the session. But if I heard the first question right, it was around, even with fact-checking, it doesn't necessarily prevent some of the countermeasures that you want to prevent the impact of, because you've got to take it into context of as in with Nazi Germany, with the political and social and economic realities into which this stuff is being presented. So even with a rigorous, this is obviously pre-social media, but even in that sort of situation, it didn't actually make any difference. So what? And secondly, was around, are there technical solutions where you can address sort of fake news on a scalable way using artificial intelligence or some other technical thing, whether that came up in your Dutch IGF meeting, I suppose is what we're asking.
We didn't really talk about this at the Dutch session. However, we did talk about the education part, and of course you can prevent it. Fake news will still be possible even if we have some solutions, but what we came up with was a quality check to flag sites as, for example, safe, trustworthy. So maybe, yeah, this could be an option to at least take away some websites that only spread fake news. But I agree, you can't really make sure that no fake news will spread at all.
Again, going to the idea that we stayed pretty technical. Ambassador Kornblum, again with the OECD, mentioned that we have to push back on the narrative that design decisions about the internet are politically neutral simply because they're technological, and reminding people that there are challenges on the algorithm, which the question kind of leads itself to, that how you manage that becomes a challenge. And leading a little bit back to the first question is going to, are these media companies and are the algorithms designed to to be making an economic impact, or are they there solely to be a media news source, which there's a definite variation on that.
Okay, in my opinion, I think that there is no technical solution to the problem of the fake news. I think that there is a question of education, first of all, and the second one is of controlling the press, the real press, because at least in my country, it's really interesting how the fake news have been spreading, are spreading through the real press that receive these WhatsApp audios, and they think that this is a real fact, and they spread all this fake information. So it's important to take into account this situation.
Like, same like my predecessor, I don't think that right now we are currently have a technology that is able to solve our problem with fake news, because artificial intelligence is not there yet, especially when we talk about the context. As Nick previously said, there is a problem with satire and something like that. Recently we had in Croatia a similar problem regarding misinformation and disinformation, where both left and right-wing parties and NGOs, medias were banned from Facebook by algorithms, and including some satire sites. So that is a problem. The problem also is when we think about the regulation, that we have to be very careful when giving more power to already powerful. That is a huge problem, and we have to take into account human rights like freedom of speech. And we can't solely rely on Facebook or Google to actually, in a certain way, impede our freedom of speech. So I think that also when governments are talking about the regulation, like in Germany, this NetzDG, that will be enacted in 1st of January, I think that is a huge problem.
Thank you. First of all, I think that general economic, socioeconomic frustrations do tend to exacerbate some of the challenges or increase the spread of fake news. However, I think from our experience, it's not necessary. It's not as of necessity that it's people who are either at a lower social, I mean, people from a high socioeconomic status, people who are well educated, you know, they all spread it, or we all spread it. Let me put it like that. So I've not seen any specific kind of individual, let me say, that falls victim to this. But generally, in terms of the issue of fact-checking, I think all of us, to some degree, are guilty of being simply too lazy to fact-check. And of course, nation-states have been guilty of that as well. Are there technical solutions? Well, I'm sure there are. For me, from the Global South, are those technical solutions affordable? This is one of the questions my government would ask, and others. And then the second question that arises is, are those and this is to echo the algorithm issue, whose perspective is actually, are the algorithms reflecting? And if I may, I'll give you a very specific example. Some time ago, I was in a similar discussion to this with somebody from, a gentleman from Facebook. Yes, Facebook. And basically, he said Facebook does not allow certain posts that criticize Muslims, criticize Islam. But Facebook has no problem with posts that criticize the Prophet of Islam. Now, for anybody who knows the Muslim world, it's the exact opposite. You can criticize the religion all you wish. You can criticize the adherents of the religion all you wish. But there are many adherents, and we've seen in certain countries in the Muslim world where some kind of criticism of the Prophet as a person, or maybe even the Quran, has actually led to riots in the street. I'm not trying to justify it, I'm just trying to show how, in this particular instance, from a Muslim perspective, this particular company got the algorithm backwards.
Thank you. I think we're ready to take some questions from the floor. If there are any more online questions, then just raise them with me, and I'll try to get them in after we've had some from outside the house.
Sana. Thank you. Do you hear me? Oksana Prihodko, European Media Platform, Ukraine. We are talking about definition of fake news and about algorithm of deleting fake news. And you said that Facebook participated in IGF UK. Did you? I'm sure that Facebook has such a definition. I don't want to comment such a definition from my side, but did you discuss this question during IGF UK with Facebook? Thank you.
So, curiously, the first question is for me. I can't speak for Facebook, but I can tell you a little bit about the discussion. And the discussion quite extensively did focus on what is fake news and what is the distinction between just sort of clickbait, where you're trying to get clicks to ridiculous stories, the top 10 things you must know before Christmas or whatever, versus actually a more targeted, and I think we're talking about state intervention targeting here. And certainly Facebook is putting a huge amount of resources into this in terms of actual fact-checking, but they did not disclose a huge amount about their algorithm and automatic filtering. They obviously do have some, but they are approaching it along the lines that it's actually very hard to distinguish some of these things through machine learning, and actually you do need people to make these sorts of judgments, and their responses seem to be more of a manual process whereby you try to react with seats on desks and actual people checking things, because only a human, an informed human, can actually make those sorts of calls quickly. It was there, but I think it's obviously a combination approach from their perspective. But I can't obviously speak for them.
Okay, we're going to go. Sorry, we had two over here. You were first, I think. No, he was. I know. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Serge Parfait Goma. I'm from Republic of Congo, and I work for the NGO IGF Congo chapter. Yeah, I have a comment with the question going to Mr. Abdul. Yes, I really love the way he was putting things, and I want to make a focus on artificial intelligence and censorship. Yeah, the good question was like, should I leave the company make the censorship or leave the state to? But according to your experience, you have been an advisor for the president. I mean, so what can be the good approach? Because when you see the origin of the problem, like in my community, the problem comes because of the lack of trust on the media, the official media. No one trusts them because we know they use it for propaganda most of the time. And if you try to bring a contra information, they censor it. And when we can have like somebody else trying to make an information coming from anywhere, people will believe on that because they don't have the really source of information. But what is really your point of view on this?
Having worked for the state, I don't always have as much confidence as maybe some others would, because I think sometimes the state fails to understand the difference between regime stability and national stability. They are not necessarily the same thing. But clearly, the influence of the major multinationals is of significant concern. And possibly, I'm just throwing this out now, possibly this is an opportunity for the civil society to engage. For example, we've seen examples from the US where you have fact check, you have Snopes. These do not belong, as far as I know, to a major multinational, nor do they belong to government. And frankly, many of them are voluntary. So that might be a model to look at. But I think also that there is a need for some government input. And again, I'd like to look at two models. One is the rumor control web page of the U.S. FEMA. And basically, you know, after a hurricane, there are a number of rumors. And so FEMA, in this case, a government entity, is able to say, no, we're not coming to your village tomorrow to give out cash, you know. So that I think there is a definite role for government. But I think when you're dealing with issues that border on propaganda, then I think that there is a major opportunity for civil society and the NGO community to actually develop these kind of websites and the mechanisms that go into debunking what I'd call social rumors. So I think there's some need for division of labor.
Thank you. I think we're ready for the next question.
So we're going to go back behind you. We'll come back to you the next round. Sorry. Yes. And then we're going to go back over here to you. So, and then back over here. So let's get going here.
Thank you very much. I think I also have a two-part question. The first part is, there's evidence that the audience for fake news and the people who read it and spread it, and then the audience for fact-check content don't overlap. So those are two different groups. And to some extent, I guess my first question is, do you think it's technically feasible, one, and two, desirable, if it's technically feasible, to sort of expose the first audience to the fact that a certain piece of information or news has been debunked? And the second bit is, I think, a wider question about the interplay between polarization and fake news, and do you think there are maybe technical ways to address that?
Okay, so I'm going to establish a rule that we have one question at a time, to be fair, and until you give your name, they can't answer. So could you just always give your name before you speak, and then we'll do the first question.
And it should be helpful to know if there's any particular panelist who you are directing the question towards initially, at least.
Yes, no, I think it was a sort of a general question, actually. And that, to some extent, I guess the question was, has this been discussed at all in your sort of IGF meetings? And to come back to the first bit, yes, my name is Stefan Luca. I'm a researcher at the European University Institute.
So, which question was it?
Okay.
There's one question, right?
Yes, one question. So, do you think it's helpful and feasible, but if helpful, to sort of try to expose the people who read and spread the fake news in the first place, on social media particularly, to the fact that it's been debunked afterwards by fact-checkers?
So, who wants to answer that one first? I mean, sorry, my own perspective is that there are lots of situations, for example, say an election, where there are quite strict rules in most jurisdictions around funding and transparency on whose statement, when a statement is made in an electoral context, on whose behalf that statement is being made, and that's supposed to be accurate and verified, and there are limits to how much can be spent on it. So I think, because one of the problems about certainly sort of the social media type things is that you don't know necessarily who is sponsoring the content and what their motivations are. So some sort of transparency in some contexts around an election does seem to be desirable, is my personal. But how you disaggregate that from, making fun of, and there are many good opportunities in the UK at the moment to make fun of the politicians and their various shortcomings. So it's difficult, and certainly the UK perspective in our IGF was that this is very difficult to automate.
I'd just like to comment, first of all, that I think your perception of no overlap is an assumption, not a fact. I think it's a great assumption on your part. I'm not necessarily sure I agree with it. I think also that it's very important to always endeavor to shine the light of truth. As they say, it sets you free. But I think one of the things we found in Nigeria is that sometimes when you have people who propagate or rather, when you have people that come up with some of these things, we found in a couple of instances when those people are actually called in by the victim politician, if I may say that. Usually it's a high-level politician. And that person says, listen, you know, this thing that you've said is not true. First of all, the propagator knows you know them, and that tends to discourage. Also, sometimes simply having a picture of the propagator with that politician then circulates undermines the propagator. And the other thing is that, and this is a lesson I think from the US election, you need to also use unlikely avenues to refute rumors. And I'm specifically talking about your political opposition. And a specific instance in a past US election was when a lady stood up in a John McCain campaign rally and basically said a whole bunch of things about Obama. And he said, listen, you know, this is John McCain, listen, that's not true. He is what he says he is. Let's talk about the issues. Now, it's very difficult to get your opposition to come to your defense like that. But I think that one of the things that the NIGF, the Nigerian Internet Governance Forum, has tried to encourage our political classes, listen, your opposition might be the victim today. And if you don't stand up and quash this issue, you might be the victim tomorrow. So it is actually in the political class's self-interest to try and kill or undermine or deal with this kind of situation.
Okay, next question, please.
Yeah, I just like to actually say that, Federico Links, I'm from the Namibian IGF, and I want to say that your assumption about his assumption, I think, is a problem. Yes, because we want to, in Namibia we face the same issues that you face in Nigeria, but we have to be realistic about our societies and where we come from. And that situation you just sketched actually proves something for me, because it's the same situation we have in Namibia, is that this whole phenomenon comes from our political classes. Long-standing ruling parties who've used what we have as state media to spread what is today, because of the American intervention on this, is today called fake news, which we've known in Africa for the longest time. And that's why in Africa, in Namibia and Southern Africa, we sort of, as journalists, are saying this. I mean, this isn't anything new. But, I mean, this is something that's created in societies where there is low level of trust in government for the longest time. So you can't just... And earlier you sort of made light of the issue of socio-economic issues playing a role in this. And I think this is a big issue. Because of the low levels of trust in government service delivery and government's engagements with citizens, it's easy to believe, it creates these environments where it's easy to believe bad things about politicians, where it's easy to believe bad things about other powerful actors in society. So we can't minimize that. We come from societies where there are low levels of trust. And it's proven, just as what you call his assumption is starting to be proven by research that is happening. Whereas, I mean, you made a statement about what's happening in Nigeria and sort of interventions from political actors. Is that recorded anywhere? What does the Nigerian research say? So that guy is talking about actual research. So before we debunk things, let's do a data-based, evidence-based. Let's base our debunking on evidence, because that's also fake news right there.
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, I think it's his assumption that there is no overlap. I think that was what I was referring to, because from my experience, there is overlap. Do I have specific research? No. Do I know about the credibility of the research you or him are talking about? I don't know. So I don't know about the research you say you have. But I think also when you say one makes light, I think I specifically mentioned that socioeconomic frustrations have an impact. I said, that's what I said. But what I was trying to qualify was that just because somebody is from a particular socioeconomic category does not, or educational status, does not automatically mean that they believe or not believe fake news. Again, from my understanding, from what I've seen, some of the people who you would least expect to believe, whether it's by education, exposure, socioeconomic income, actually believe the fake news. That's really what I was trying to get at. Okay.
So we're going to go here. And before you speak, I just want to do one more quick count because we're going to be running out of time shortly. Do we have a remote speaker? Yes. Okay, we're going to do remote speaker. We're going to go here. I have one more. And is there anyone else in line? Okay, so remote, here, here, and here.
And for the purposes of time, we also probably won't get all of the panelists to answer all of the questions. We'll just find someone.
Okay, first question. Should those that spread fake news, when debunked, be confronted?
That sounds like a really good game show. I guess that's, if it goes to the level of being able to manage through, if it's not done through anonymity, I can never say that word, if we actually can verify that that's the person who's spreading the fake news.
There's a comment. It's not a question. Maybe I leave it out since it's not a question. Should I read it? Okay. Is the same person that had asked the question, Martin, okay, and he's saying,
Sorry, who's the question and comment from?
okay, he's calling from Martin, from where? Belgium. He's calling from Belgium. Okay. He's saying also related to the current discussion, can we think about alternative business models to support media diversity besides advertising? For instance, some cryptocurrencies are meant to do just that. That's his comment. I don't know. Maybe you want to amplify it.
I think it's the same person who'd already asked a question. So in fairness, we should move on to questions inside the room. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I believe we're doing comments as well as questions. My name is Joanna Bryson. I'm a professor in artificial intelligence at University of Bath, and I'm here because the OECD wants me to talk about smart policies for intelligent machines on Wednesday. And I just wanted to come in on a couple of the things you said that I think are very important. First of all, this thing about AI forgery, it is a thing. We can forge handwriting, we can forge speech, we can forge video with speech moving to the speech. We need to think about policies for dealing with communicating this fact to our people. Secondly, parody is actually not a problem whatsoever. I strongly recommend you look at a conference called Text as Data. It's by political scientists working with computer scientists, and they're really good at dealing with this kind of thing. Parody signals itself often by a twist in the last sentence, and they find no difficulty in pulling parody out. And finally, I think there's been some of the confusion and conflict has been about what really is fake news. Is it the stuff being generated by algorithm so that you click on it only, or is it the stuff that the real politicians are telling the real newspapers and getting in there? And some of the things that you've been saying when it seems like you're at loggerheads is because you're confounding those two things, which as our African colleagues are telling us, that's a real continuum. There is no simple line between those. But we need real people, as Facebook has said, to confirm what you said. We have to have real people, not only because people are magic, but just because multiple people work better than one algorithm. Because any one algorithm or one person, you can learn your way around. You can use Facebook, have 20 million people click and see what they click on, right? So that's the real problem of fake news, is that it's not trying to reflect the real world, so it's easy for it to optimize to that algorithm. So that's what's going on with that. And politicians are using that to get elected. So you can't discriminate fake news from real politicians.
So I'm going to make a quick responsive comment before we go to the next question, and that is a clear advertisement for all of you to pay attention to the workshop you're speaking at. Please. Oh, yes, if you want to.
Sure.
Yeah, but you are saying that IE can distinguish parody. The thing is, you have to take into account language.
Yeah.
Creation is a very specific language, and there are no AI tools, and it would be very expensive to develop them to distinguish the satire from news and fake news. So when you are talking about debunking fake news and removing fake news from English-based sites, it's okay. I am aware of those tools. Full Fact is working a lot on those tools and so on. But in specific language region, that is a huge problem.
Okay. Regionalization, I think we should take that off board and get that going. Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, a lot of the Leave campaign in the UK referendum was based on the claim that the UK would be £260 million a week better off. And at the time, it was clearly said that this was obviously not true, but it still was propagated and is still a headline figure. So even if you know it's not true, the fact that people say it's a bit like the sort of the Obama not being born in the USA type thing. You can publicly debunk it or contradict it at the time, but there's a sort of the message sometimes lands in receptive minds and they want to believe it anyway. So I don't know whether there's ever going to be a solution to that. People are just quite complicated.
Okay, thank you. I'm Veridiana Alimonti. I'm from a Brazilian organization that deals with media issues and digital rights. And before making my question, and who is interested to step in can step in to answer it, I would like to stress 2 points that we discussed here. One is that fake news is not a novelty in Global South, but not only because of the state-owned companies. In Brazil, we have a private oligopoly that it was already very used to lie and didn't have alternative means of communication to counter it. And the second one is the danger thing about giving more power to the already powerful platforms. They are already very powerful in disseminating the content and deciding who can see what and by their algorithms. So it's important to be aware of this when talking about fake news. And the question that, in my view, lies behind this debate, the debate of fake news, is who is the person, or who is the person allowed to say what is truth or what is not truth? Who is the owner of the truth? And I think that when we talk about solutions, this is the question that we have to have in mind. So it's much more, in my view, about transparency and media literacy than criminal solutions or removal content solutions. So that this is what I want to hear about the panel. What is the best solutions? What are the best solutions to deal with the question, who owns the truth in our current context?
Just while we ponder that question, are there any other questions after this? Is there just one more question? Okay. Hold your. I'm just trying to manage the time here because I want to leave a little bit of time at the end to sum up. So there's one or maybe two more questions, and that's it. Please.
So do I have the floor? Yeah.
Not yet. We'll just answer the first question. So does anyone deal with this one? Okay. Thank you.
I completely agree with you in everything. I think it's really interesting to analyze how we are expecting these huge tech giants to solve the problem of the truth. And we are tending to create a referee of the truth. So I don't think it's the correct way to solve the problem. And in my opinion, there is no easy solution for this problem, at least completely. And when you talk about the owner of the truth, I think that it's quite important, this issue of the transparency, and also the work in multi-stakeholder perspective. It's a work of all of us to try to fight against the problem of the fake news. I'm talking about the NGOs, the press, the government, the academical and the individuals. We as citizens need to help to be the fact checkers of this social media.
Thanks. Next question.
My name is Larry Maggot, and I'm CEO of ConnectSafely.org. And in response to a comment made just a minute ago, we just published a booklet called Media Literacy and Fake News. And I might add, it also involves emotional intelligence, because the reality is that there will always be hucksters and pranksters and demagogues and autocrats and Donald Trumps and others who, and Vladimir Putin's and others who want to lie and mislead people, and algorithms that help them do it. But the key thing to protect us is media literacy and also emotional literacy, to understand what is have the critical thinking skills to process that information, and also have the emotional intelligence to not be misled and whipped into a frenzy simply because someone is confirming a bias of yours. So it's really, I think, a broader issue. I wish technology could solve the problem, and obviously applaud any serious efforts to do that with technology. But I think at the end of the day, it's education, emotional literacy, and media literacy.
Yeah, I agree with you, because actually when we talk about fake news, one of the biggest things of fake news is that they are appealing to emotions of the readers. That is their core operator, so to say.
Thank you. So I think we've got just 2 more minutes of questions, and then we're going to have a little summing up. So last question, please.
Thank you. My name is Julia. I'm from Brazil also, and I'm a law student. And one of my main concerns regarding fake news is probably the removal of the content, because if you just remove it and you pretend it never happened, people will still be disinformed. So it's also very important to talk about the responsibility of big companies and big newspapers to actually own their mistakes and say, yes, that was wrong, so we like to correct that, because that's actually very important to spread the truth about what they reported. So I don't know if you have any.
No, I think I heard that as more of a sort of a comment rather than a question. It's like you can publish something and you can remove it, but that doesn't exactly remediate the fact that the false news has been put into the domain in the first place. I think that brings us quite nicely onto the final section here. And I want to ask each of the panelists just to talk for a minute or so about possible solutions from the regional and the national perspectives. And I think possibly we can start with Colombia, because they had it as quite a big focus of their IGF meeting.
Okay, as I said, solve the problem of fake news is a multi-stakeholder solution. So we have, for example, the work of the press. It's really interesting how they are working on as fact checkers of all these WhatsApp information that I have been talking about, this WhatsApp spreading, and also how the government is trying to avoid the polarization in the country, take into account the problem of the peace process. So it's interesting that the government is creating media literacy solutions to try to avoid the polarization and the violence in the media, talking about political situations like the peace process. So, yeah, I think also that we as NGOs have been we are working on fact checking also. So we are trying to help the press to analyze this spreading of social media, and also to analyze specific politicians that have been in our country creating news that could be really dangerous for the for specific persons in our country. If you are marked as guerrilla, as part of the guerrilla, or you are part of the army, or you killed someone, or they create fake news about it, it's a huge danger for the person that is target of this fake news. You could be killed in whatever in one moment. So it's important to be really aware of the movements of these politicians that are spreading fake news.
Thank you. And I'll keep the panelists a bit on their toes. I'll just pick them at random now. So not going in any particular order, but can we have the USA next, maybe?
Sure. So when talking about solutions, again, Ambassador Kornblum mentioned that the importance of the role of making the internet, the U.S. was very important in making the internet maintain freedom and openness, but we need to be careful about keeping truth in journalism. Craig Newmark commented that he's trying to actually find a free market solution to fact-checking. So it's something that he's actually working on in his foundation. And then Vint Cerf finished up with Trust But Verify. So I think it's all echoing things that we're hearing on the panel.
Thank you. And perhaps can we go to Croatia next?
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem because it will definitely affect the internet in a huge way in the future. I think that the recent decision of FCC proves that, because discussion about decision on FCC of net neutrality was also influenced by some sort of fake views that were posted during that discussion. Because of that, we have to take care of a younger population through media literacy programs, media news literacy especially, to give them the tools to understand the news, to understand and distinguish real news from fake news. And I have to say also, I'm aware firsthand that Google and Facebook are doing a lot in regards to this issue, because it directly influences their business model, as I said before, and they are trying to find appropriate solutions for that. And but the question that was asked, or comment that was said, we have to be very careful in the future when we remove the content. That is a huge problem regarding the human rights. And who is removing content? Why is the content removed? That can be, those issues can be raised in a legal sense. So that is also a huge problem in the future.
Thank you. Can we go to the Netherlands next?
Yeah. So the solutions that we talked about were the quality mark. This way users can see which websites are trustworthy. And I believe in the audience a question was about exposing the fake websites. Well, this is the other way around. So pushing websites that are qualified as trustworthy and make sure that those are spread more. For example, on Facebook, the algorithm can make sure that trustworthy websites pop up more. The other solution that we talked about was the more social part, so the education, that we have to teach kids at a young age noticing fake news and what to do with it, and how to make sure they use trustworthy sources. Then another solution that was mentioned was paying for media. So because there's a lot of competition for journalists, So it could be an option to have more paid platforms that are, so that users know it's good quality. And also blockchain was mentioned, but we believe that it was too expensive to implement. So we really didn't really focus on the blockchain solution. And also we shortly talked about artificial intelligence, but we believe it's not ready to implement yet. So these are the things that we talked about in the Netherlands.
Thank you. Well, that just leaves Nigeria.
Thank you. First of all, in Nigeria, what we tried to do was to articulate some kind of solution framework. And the framework basically consists of 4 key components. The first one is really we need to have a mechanism to identify the sources of fake news and hate speech in our case. And part of that process we felt was to develop some kind of early warning system that would triage the messages as they come in. And basically some kind of categorization and monitoring system. And there are ways, once you get that kind of information, you can actually legally take down fake social media accounts. The second part of the framework was actually to actively discredit, discourage, derail, or diminish the sources of fake news. And one of the ways to do this was actually just to drown it in factual narratives. We needed to also look for ways to reach out to those who either generate or propagate those kind of messages, as I'd mentioned earlier. And of course, we also talked about leveraging unlikely avenues for refuting such rumors. The third pillar of what we looked at was basically the drowning of fake news and hate speech with the positive narratives. And here we had 3 subcomponents, and they're divided into some tasking. First of all, at the individual level, I think there was a need, or we identified that there was a need for each and every one of us at the individual level to be a bit more skeptical, to question some of these narratives when we see them. The second part was that we saw an opportunity for civil society to basically set up some kind of credible validation website or mechanism. And again, this speaks to, frankly, the challenges of trust towards government. But having said that, yes, we did look at some of the rumor control web pages, and we felt that on the more technical level, the rumor control web pages, as exemplified by the US FEMA and a very interesting website in Malaysia. And then we actually looked very closely at a model that we understood or we learnt from in Malaysia in terms of, for lack of a better description, some kind of offensive operation. But the need to take what we would call a whole of society approach. In the case of government, a whole of government approach. So it's not about a particular government department. And basically the model that we studied, the Malaysian model that we studied, you'd have some kind of group of people who basically interact, for example, on various WhatsApp chat sites, and then would send information that really didn't add up to some kind of coordinating, clearing site. In the Malaysian model, it's actually under their Communications Commission. And basically, what they do is that they send this fake news or alleged fake news to an institutional expert. So, for example, we had a very strong circulation of information that HIV-tainted blood was put in some kind of soft drink, and therefore don't buy the soft drink. And so you would have the institutional expert, say the Ministry of Health, within 24 hours would publish on their website that, for example, the virus can't live more than a few seconds outside the body. And because they are the institutional expert, they would have some kind of credibility. But the idea was that for other websites, particularly in government, but also outside of government, to now point links to people who wanted clarification, and also send out some kind of advisory notices. So I think that was to address one of the issues raised from the Brazil about clarifying and not just removing it. And then the other MDAs and the general public. So this was the kind of model, the framework that I think, well, not I think, we really have advised our government to work towards.
Thank you very much. If just to sort of summarize what I've captured, the themes coming out of the panelists, it's reassuringly old school in the age of the internet. So critical thinking skills, literacy, transparency, quality and thoughtfulness of approach when writing journalism, being able to call out something for being fake when it manifestly is that, and I suppose I'd add to my own one a bit of a sense of humour about some of the sorts of things that you do see on the internet. It's absolutely brilliant. I think it was Dame Edna Everage, the Australian comedian, who said that if we couldn't laugh at ourselves, we might miss some of the best jokes. But I would like to give a huge thank you to everybody on the panel, and everybody for contributing, and to my co-moderators, the remote participation. Everything has gone extremely well, and thank you very much. A round of applause, please.
And now I'm going to make a closing invitation to remind all of you, Marilyn Cade speaking, there are 8 NRI to NRI collaborative sessions this week. And so you've just been in one. I hope you'll look at the rest of them and perhaps show up at some of them as well. You'll see different NRIs participating in many cases. Our goal, we have about 30 of the 101 national and regional NRIs here at the IGF and actively participating, and I see some of their members actually in this audience.
Hi. How are you? How's everything? It's a pleasure to meet you too.
Yeah, I heard you did 2 things already. It's only 2 days.
Thank you very much.
Cybersecurity session.
Yes, I was. Thank you.
I'll tell you really quickly with that thing about
Yes.
absolutely zero overlap. It's work by a friend of mine and a guy named Andrew Castle.
Okay. But that's in Europe.
No, it's done in North America.
Yeah.
And
She didn't write it at all. She missed it. It's not a problem.
Right.
on clearly fake sites.
Yes.
And then they had you a little welcome to look at what they had on their computer. And there was absolutely 0 pieces where someone who looked at the fake news looked at the original and also looked at the fact check.
Right.
So what you do have is two disjoint audiences using those different in this different news